Okay, everyone, we are going to get started. Thanks for joining us today. I know because of time zone issues, a lot of people will just be checking out the recording of this later. But thanks for joining me. I know it's after hours for those of you in California, like me over here. So we will go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to show you around is the web dashboard for Vizible. So this is at vizible.worldviz.com. And this is where you can organize and administer your organization. So with Vizible, you can create VR presentations, but with your Vizible organization, you can actually invite users to your organization so that they can work on presentations with you. And you also have a shared cloud library of assets that you can all make use of. So if you want to work on VR presentations or experiences with other people, colleagues, students, whoever, you can use your organization to do that. To do that, you just go to the Users tab and you can invite them right there. I'll show you around a few other things on your dashboard before we'll actually just hop right in and start making a presentation. You can go to the Sessions tab to see if you have any sessions scheduled. And a session is a meeting inside one of your VR presentations where you're actually going to interact with other people for real-time communication and collaboration. The Documentation tab links you to the Vizible documentation. And this is where you can dive a bit deeper into particular topics of interest to you. This is probably a good place to go. After this webinar, I'll kind of be giving you the basics, but then for more advanced topics, you can dive right in. You can also access the downloads from the dashboards. That's in the Downloads tab. And you need both Presentation Designer and then also the client. So Vizible Presentation Designer is what you use to create VR experiences. And the client is what you use to then host meetings or attend meetings. So you need both of them to use Vizible. You'll also find a Sample Assets tab. And this is where you can download some sample asset packs that we've made available to you. So hopefully you downloaded the starter pack, which I linked to in the email about this webinar. But if you want to browse around and check out other template sample assets, then feel free. Of course, you can also import your own assets into Vizible. If you would like to submit a bug, you can use the Feedback tab. But if you have a quick question and you want to chat with our support team, you can actually go to the bottom right, and there's a little blue Contact Us. You can use that. That'll open up an instant chat window that you can use to chat with the developers directly. Okay, so now that let's say that you've done your downloads and you're ready to go, they will show up on your desktop like this. You'll have Vizible Presentation Designer, but you'll also have Attendee and Presenter. Now, Presentation Designer is what we're going to hop into first to create the VR experience. And then once your experience is done and you've scheduled a session, if you are the host or presenter, you'll use Vizible Presenter. Those that are attending your session can use Vizible Attendee. And worth noting that anyone without creating an account can use Attendee. So when you create your session, you can send anyone a link to download just the attendee, and then they can join your session for a meeting in VR. So go ahead and open up Presentation Designer and then log in with your Vizible credentials. You'll be taken to a screen like this, the launcher. You have two tabs up here. Scenes is where you can see scenes that you've already made, your VR presentations. And then New Scenes is where we want to go. And that's where you can start up a blank scene. So we want to go ahead and double click on blank scene. Take a quick second, and then you'll see this interface in front of you. So let's get a grip with the different views and menus around us here. Front and center is what's called the scene view. And this is where you actually piece together your VR experience. You drag assets into here, and you'll see them visually pop up. This is the biggest part of the view. And you can look around it if you hold down left click on the mouse, and then drag, that'll rotate the camera around. If you hold down right click and drag, that will pan the camera right, left, down, or up. And then if you use the scroll wheel, that will zoom the camera out or in. You'll see that there's a grid here that you can turn on or off. Okay. Now, down here at the bottom, this is your asset library. So this is where you sort of store the different things, the building blocks of your VR presentations. Now, these assets can be a number of different things. They can be 3D models, they can be flat videos, video spheres, point cloud data, images, PDFs, multi-page PDFs, sounds, and I think that might be about it. The first thing you want to do is drag your assets into your asset library, and then you drag them from your asset library into your presentation. Now, over here on the left, this is called the slide view. And in some ways, Vizible is set up sort of like PowerPoint in that you've got a series of slides here on the left. Now, VR presentations are a lot different from PowerPoint presentations because in the context of Vizible, each slide, instead of being a 2D canvas, is a 3D canvas, right? Kind of a whole 3D scene or a virtual world. So when you're inside of Vizible, holding a meeting, giving a presentation, you as the presenter, you have a slide clicker that lets you navigate through your different slides. And you'll actually be navigating through the different slides that you've set up here in the slide view. Now we start you off just with one slide here, but to add another slide, you just simply hit the plus button. You can also right click on a slide to duplicate a slide. And you can also delete a slide simply by clicking minus. You can title the slides up here at the top by double clicking. And you'll notice if you look close, you'll see a little green box, GA. If you were working on this presentation or this VR experience with one of your colleagues in your organization, you would actually see what slide they were working on, and any changes they make, you'll see those changes in real time. So it's really kind of like live collaboration, but for VR. What I'm going to do now is actually bring an asset into the scene. Oh, sorry, I forgot one menu over here on the right. The component graph is where you can see the different objects that you've brought into your presentation. Right now, there's not a lot there, just the scene object that is in every presentation just by virtue of being a Vizible presentation. But as soon as we drag objects in here, you'll see them also pop up here. You can then select them and modify some of their properties, as we'll see later, down here below the component graph. Okay, so now that we're ready to get started, go ahead and find the starter pack of assets that I had you download in advance of this session. You're also welcome to simply play around with your own assets if you'd like, but we'll go ahead and just use assets from this starter pack. So the first thing I want is kind of a base environment for my scene. And there's something called the conference room in your asset pack. Go ahead and drag the conference room to your asset library. At the very bottom, you'll see that it appeared here. Okay. Once it's there, I can actually go ahead and drag it into my scene. Okay. And here it is. Notice that you can adjust these menus. You can actually drag them wherever you want if you don't like our default layout. I'm going to go ahead and make the asset library a little bit smaller. So here's our conference room. This is a great looking asset. And what I want to do next is, this is the first slide, right? So when people first join your Vizible session or your meeting, they're going to be in this space. But you can actually configure where exactly they will appear. You can set their initial viewpoint for both you and the attendee. The way to do that is with these assets that you'll see in your asset library called the presenter stand-in and the attendee stand-in. I see someone's got a question for me, so let me hop over. Oh, Steve, you might, you only see assets, you might be stuck. I know that when you're on the launcher, in fact, I'm going to close this really fast. You might be down here looking at your asset library when you want to have selected the launcher, at which point you'll see these two tabs. Let me know if that helps you out, Steve. Okay, we'll see, by the way, now that I go to my scenes, my scene is here, it's new scene. You can also give it a title here. I'm gonna call it webinar session. I'm gonna go ahead and open it back up. Okay, we've got our conference room here. Okay, looks like you're good. Okay, as I was saying, you can set the initial viewpoint of presenters or attendees for each slide. The way to do that is drag in the presenter and attendee stand-in. So you drag it in. It looks like this big figure. The presenter is blue. The attendee is red. Now, once these are in here, you can adjust their position, rotation, and if it's a different object, you can also adjust its scale. Now, you can click an object in the scene or in the component graph to select it. I want the presenter and attendee to be facing each other to avoid confusion when you first join the scene. So I'm going to change the rotation of the presenter and attendee so that they're facing each other. Now, if you look at the top left, you'll see a few buttons. There's the transform, which lets you move objects in the space. Okay, and these objects could be anything, 3D model, image, all assets sort of, you're able to move them in the scene. And then we've got rotate up here, pulls up these rings, and you can use them to rotate assets in the space. I'm gonna go ahead and rotate my presenter this way. Next to rotation, you've got scale. So if you've got an object that you want to scale up or down, change its size, you can use scale. I don't want to change the scale of these because that wouldn't do anything, so I'll ignore that for now. I am, though, going to rotate the attendee so that the attendee is facing the presenter. Okay. Now, the other step you need to do is right-click on the presenter, click Reset Viewpoint. This will ensure that when presenters or attendees hit this slide, this is the viewpoint that they'll have. Now, our slide one, you'll see it has this sort of gray image over here representing it. To get a better visual indicator of actually what's on this slide, you can go ahead and hit this little camera button, which just takes a little screen grab of the slide and drops it in the slide view so that it's easier for you to tell which slide is which. Okay. Now, for this presentation, this is going to be a little showcase showing off different VR headsets. Let's say maybe you're someone showing off different prototypes. Maybe you're a teacher running a class on some different objects. In this case, because the starter pack includes a lot of models of VR headsets, we're going to go ahead and run with that to make that easier for those that are following along. Now, I want these headsets to appear on the next slide. In other words, on this slide, I'm just going to meet with my attendees and kind of introduce the presentation. I'm going to say hi, we'll do introductions, and then when we're ready to go, I'll transition with my slide clicker to the next slide. So for this, I need a new slide. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this first one because I want the second slide to be in the same room. But the difference is that in the second slide, I want to have the 3D models of the VR headsets. So I'm going to drag in the Samsung Gear VR. I'm going to drag in the Oculus. And I'll go ahead and drag in the PSVR and also the Vive and the Daydream. Now, I also want to throw an image into this slide. So I know there wasn't an image in your starter pack, but if you want to bring an image from your computer into your asset library so you can follow along, go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring this one in. And I'm also going to bring in a PDF. So if you've got a PDF on your computer that you can experiment with, go ahead and drag in the PDF as well. Okay, our headsets are loaded up. We are ready to go. So first, I'll go ahead and drag in the PSVR. See, it appears here. I'd like it to show up little bit above the table, just kind of right in view, so I'll adjust it. Go ahead and bring in the Oculus. It's like this is an older version of the Oculus, so I'm taking a trip back through time here. And let's go ahead and bring in the Gear VR. This is a time where we can show off the scaling feature. So if you want the model to be bigger, go ahead and find the scale mode next to the rotate mode. You can either grab one axis to scale it up on. This will just make it taller. This would make it wider. But if you grab it from the middle, that'll scale it proportionally. So it gets bigger and keeps the proportions. Scale it up, and I'll just go ahead and scale it back down. Okay, now that these models are in here, you can actually do a lot with them. So for instance, if you right-click, you'll see a number of actions. So these are all of the different actions that you can set on the assets within your presentation. Some of the simple ones we can go over quickly. If you want to give it a spin, you can give it a spin. You can adjust the spin parameters here. Once I gave it a spin, you'll see that the spin showed up as a property in the component graph. This is where then you can adjust different aspects of it. Okay. If you want to remove it, you'd simply hit the trash can. Okay, see it stop spinning. In this case, when the slide loads, I'd actually like these headsets to sort of move up from under the table, kind of float up. Okay. So what I'm going to do is actually start them out below the table. And then what I'm going to do is add a move to action. Okay. Where it'll move to, you can set the X, Y, or Z value. I'll have it move to, that looks good, 1.1. Okay. But it's going to start out here, and then it'll move there. I'm going to add this same effect to the Oculus. I'm going to give it a move to. And then also the Gear VR. I'm going to give it a move to. And the move to value, bring this down there. Okay. Now you'll notice when I went back to slide 1 and then moved to slide 2, you'll see it actually gives you a preview of the animations that you've set up, right? So those actions automatically happen as soon as that slide loads. So we'll see this later, but when you're in Vizible and you're in slide 1 and you as the presenter then pull out your slide clicker tool and you move everyone to slide 2, those actions will happen automatically. Now we did a very simple move here, just for the purpose of time, but you also can set rotate to, if you know you want something to rotate, scale to, if you want something to automatically shrink or enlarge. You can do a fade to, if you want certain things to fade in or out. You can set a spin, as you saw. Hidden is what you would toggle, as I said before, to make something disappear or appear. You can also make a model grabbable. And if you want users in VR to be able to reach out with a controller or your mouse on desktop mode to kind of grab the object and be able to inspect it and check it out, bring it close, pass it to another attendee, you'll want it to be grabbable. I'm going to go ahead and make these grabbable, and then later on when we're in the presentation, you'll see what that does. So that's just a simple right click. I'm going to go ahead and make it grabbable. Okay. Now, we'll see later that you can also trigger animations or any action based on button presses. So we triggered these just by virtue of the slide transition. You can also make these things happen based on user behavior. Like when an attendee pushes a button, that triggers a particular action. Okay, I'll show you how to set those up later. Now, we've been working with 3D models so far, but we're going to go ahead and mess with some more asset types now. So what I'm going to do is I want users to be able to see this handy image of some mixed reality headsets, okay? Because I don't have models of them yet, but I want people to be able to see them. Now that we're on this topic, by the way, worth noting that Vizible works on either desktop PC without VR, or an Oculus Rift, or an HTC Vive, or any of the Windows MR headsets. I'm actually using one of the Lenovo headsets here, and it's come to be one of my favorites. So this image is here. It looks nice and big, just like a model. I can move it, I can rotate it, and I can scale it. Okay. Let's say that you want it to fade in as soon as this slide loads. What you would do is set its alpha to 0. Oh, maybe because this isn't a PNG file, I can't adjust the transparency of the image. So that's actually a good tip. Sorry about that. This is a JPEG, so I can't do that. If this were a PNG, you could adjust its transparency and have it fade in. Okay, see, I've got a question, so I'm going to pop over. Okay, good question, Steve, asking about the Vive Focus. So the Vive Focus is something we are actively sort of thinking about. I can say doesn't work yet, but we're working on this. We've been really impressed by the device and what it seems to be able to do as a standalone 6 degrees of freedom device. So if that's something you're really interested in, Steve, we'd be interested in hearing about that. So good question. Okay, I also want to drag in a PDF. So in Vizible, you can also bring in PDFs. Looks like that one didn't exactly drag in. Try it once more. Looks okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drag it right in. Here's our PDF. I see it's rotated the wrong way, so I'm gonna go ahead and rotate it around. Notice that I'm doing this rotation manually, but you could also adjust the X, Y, and Z values over here in the component graph. Okay. Got another question? Looks good. Yes. So right now you can actually do particle effects using a tool that I can recommend to you. And also physically based rendering on GLTF models. So I'm not going to get into the weeds too much on the kinds of 3D models you can bring in here. I think that'll be a topic for a future webinar, kind of 3D model workflow. But what I can say is that this is an area that we're actively working on. For now, there are definitely flows to bring in .fbx, .obj, really any 3D model file format you've got, we can bring it in here one way or another. Okay, great. So let's say you'd also like a video in your presentation. So what I'm going to do is, this slide is getting a little busy. Everywhere you look, there's something to see. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new slide. Okay, I'll go ahead and duplicate this one, except on this slide, I don't want this image, so I'm going to remove it from the slide. And I also don't want the PDF, so I'm going to right click on it and remove it from the slide. Now, if I were to click remove component, this would actually remove it from every slide. That's not what I want to do, right? I just want to remove it from this slide. Okay. Now, what I'd like to show up here now, once you move to slide 3, is a video. The video that I have here, this will be a flat video. We'll do a video sphere in a second. Is a video that shows what it's like to have a really wide tracking area in VR. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and scale it up as well. Now, videos have a few different properties than 3D models. If you right-click on a video, you'll see that you can make it so that it automatically is playing once you and your attendees hit this slide in the presentation. You can set it to be looping. You can adjust its volume right here in Presentation Designer. And you can give it a little frame if you want it to look like it's on a TV screen. I don't want this to start playing automatically because I'm going to trigger its playback manually within Vizible. So I don't need to do that, but you can see if you do click it, the video will indeed just start playing in Presentation Designer as well. I'm going to adjust it so it's up there a bit more. Maybe I'll even bring it closer, actually. There we go. Okay. So far, you've got a kind of intro scene, just familiarizing yourself with this conference room. When you go to the next slide, we set up some actions on these headset models so they kind of rise up with a neat effect coming into view. They're grabbable so that you and your attendees can actually grab them, inspect them, pass them back and forth. And we also showed a PDF and an image. On slide 3, we removed the image in the PDF. We've brought in a video. The video doesn't automatically play, but will trigger its playback inside the session itself. All right. Now, we want to go ahead and change the whole sort of environment in the next slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new slide. I'm not going to duplicate this one because I don't want anything from this slide. I'm just going to make a new one. I'm going to title these. OK, great. Now, on this slide, I want an entirely different sort of backdrop. You'll notice that you can search your asset library. And if you only want to see your 3D models, for instance, you can filter by asset type. You can just look for model, right? This will just show up your models. Or you could just look for videos, okay? To clear the filters that you've set up, you just hit this button over here on the right. Now, I know that the asset that I want, which is also in your template pack, is called the Piazza. Okay, the Piazza is a great sort of open air environment. I'm going to load it up here. There it is. It's a gorgeous sort of Spanish plaza. And we'll get out of that stuffy conference room. Again, so I want to arrange my stand-ins accordingly. So I've got the presenter stand-in. I've got the attendee stand-in. And I'd like them to be facing each other. So I'm just going to go ahead and rotate them accordingly. Looks good. Now, on this slide, I want to give my attendees another way, show them a look at another way of attending a VR experience. And the way I'm going to do that is with a video sphere. Okay. So one of the assets in your starter pack is called, let's find it here, Corner Cave OR. Go ahead and drag that into your library. This is actually a 360-degree video. Now, for tips on formatting this video the right way or recommended cameras, you can actually check out the documentation. We've got some articles about this. Once you have your video formatted properly, see it in here, and you can drag it right in. Oop. Now, see, it showed up as if it were a flat video, and that's because we didn't tag it as a spherical video. So when you have the asset selected, you'll see down here in your asset library, you can tag it so that the system recognizes what kind of video it is. You actually want it to be spherical. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Now that it's tagged properly, I can drag it in, and it shows up as this kind of magical looking orb. Okay. Now, this doesn't look too exciting. You might be wondering, where is the video? But as soon as you're invisible and you point a tool at it, you can expand the video and then play it so that it appears. Now, if you want to get a little glimpse of the video, you can indeed sort of zoom in to it and kind of get a view. Okay. And just like other videos, you can right-click on it. You can do Start Playing, okay, and so forth. Now, we're not really going to be able to see what this video sphere looks like until we're actually invisible. So just trust me when I say that it won't just be this kind of magical looking ball. You can then expand them out and look at video spheres with each other. All right. Now, what I want to show you now is a way to set up different kinds of interactivity. So if you remember in slide 2, we had these VR headsets kind of hover up from the table, so kind of automatically as soon as this scene or slide loads. But what I want to show you now is to actually set up your presentation using sensors and buttons so that you or your users can interact with the environment to trigger different actions. And all of this is done without any coding, so it's actually really accessible even to kind of non-technical users. So as a simple example, what I'm going to do first is I'll make a proximity sensor. Okay, this is an asset that you will always have in your asset library. You'll see these kind of core 5, right? You've got your stand-ins, and you've also got these 2 over here: the time sensor, the proximity sensor, and a teleport location. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and drag in a proximity sensor. Now, when it first appears, it looks like this sort of sci-fi tunnel. But you can right-click on it to adjust its shape. We'll do a set shape, and I'll make it a sphere. And just like other objects, you can adjust where it is. So how do these sensors work? Well, you can make them respond to a few things. So if you right-click on it and hover over on trigger. Now, these are the different things that will set the sensor off. You have a few options. It could be inside button press. In other words, if users, when they're in your presentation, stick their controller inside of this sensor area and press the trigger button, or their mouse if they're on desktop, that will cause an action to happen. Now, if you want that action to happen not when users first push the button, but when they actually push it, then release it, sort of like a typical mouse click where you hold down the mouse and then you release it, you would want to do inside button release. Okay. Now, enter proximity. This is if you want an action to happen as soon as users simply move their hands or their head into the sensor area. Okay. So if you wanted something to happen, for example, when users walked past a certain area in your scene, you could do that. Okay. You would simply set up your sensor to be scaled up maybe all the way across your scene so that as soon as users cross this barrier, that would trigger an action. Okay. I don't need the sensor this big, so I'm going to bring it back down to size here. That looks okay. If you want an action to happen not just when users enter the area, but when they enter it and then leave it, that would be exit proximity. So if you wanted to make sure they had, say, gone through a particular area or moved their hand through an area, you could do exit proximity. Now, there are other fancy things you can do with these sensors that I don't have time to get into. This might be a topic for a future webinar, kind of some of the advanced things you can do with proximity sensors. We're going to keep it relatively simple for this one and just do an inside button release. This is actually the most common one, sort of inside, you put your controller in the area and you press the trigger. Now, once you set this, you'll see that the sensor goes green. This lets you know that you're in this mode where you're now setting what will happen when the sensor goes off. Okay. Let's say in this case, you want to set another movement on an object, for example. So what I'm going to do is click on the one other object I have in this scene, one other asset, this video sphere, and I'm going to right click on it. And whatever I set here, this is going to be what will happen when users trigger the proximity sensor. In this case, when they click a button inside the sensor area. Okay. So I'm going to give it a move to, and I'm just going to simply have it move. For a quick example, move kind of up in space. You'll see that it gives you a preview of the action that you've set. Okay. And then when all looks good and fine to you, you can right click again, do exit active trigger. You'll see the video sphere moves back to its original position. The sensor is no longer green, and you're sort of back to your regular editing mode. Now, to get a preview of what you've set up on a sensor, you can always right click on it, go to on trigger, and go to inside button release. The program will automatically show you what you have set up on that trigger. In this case, the video sphere moving up. I'm going to exit that trigger. Now, that wasn't a very practical trigger because all we did was cause the sphere to move up. And I want to go over another thing that you can do with the proximity sensor. I'm going to go ahead and drag another one into the scene. You can set up these sensors to be, you can have as many of them as you want. And you can also make them hidden. So if you want the sensor to actually be maybe hidden, or maybe you have a model that actually has a button on it that looks like a button, you don't need to actually see the blue outline of the sensor. You can sort of hide it such that it'll work in the background, but you just won't see it. Now this sensor, I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to give it a shape. And I'm going to make it a sphere again. But now this sensor, I want the user to actually be able to move to a different slide. So let's say you want to have a button that always takes people back to square one, back to slide one. Right, here's how you would do that. So you right click on the sensor. Once again, you do on trigger. I want to make it a button release again. So I'm going to do inside button release. The sensor turns green, lets you know you're in this mode, right, where you're setting what will happen when the trigger goes off. Now, if you select a scene object in the component graph and right click on it, you'll see that you can do set slide. And then a property comes up, set slide, where you can pick a number value. This number is the number of the slide that it will transition to. So in this case, we actually want this button to take you home back to slide 1. So we're going to just keep it at 1. If you wanted a button to go to slide 2 or slide 3, you could adjust accordingly, right? Now we're all good. So I'm going to right click and do exit active trigger. Okay, great. So as you can see, on the one hand, you can go through the presentation in sort of a linear way. If you're in there as the presenter, you pull up your slide clicker, you can move next, next, next. But you can also make the presentations a little bit more self-guided, and they don't need to be linear. They can be more dynamic. In other words, you could have a user interface with a bunch of buttons that each trigger different slides. You could say, oh, pick which part of the room or the property you want to visit. One of the buttons takes you to slide 2, where you're in the bedroom. One of the buttons takes you to slide 4, where maybe you have the basement set up. So you can set things up to be sort of more guided by user choice or your choice at the spur of the moment, and things don't need to be linear. Okay, looks good. I want to briefly go over one other kind of sensor. That's the time sensor. So with proximity sensors, those go off based on user behavior, right? User position or user button click. But time sensors actually go off just based on time. So if you want certain actions to happen or certain slide transitions to happen, simply based on the number of seconds that have elapsed, you can do that with time sensors. Okay? So let's say that you know that on this slide here, slide 4, once you've moved to this slide, maybe after 10 seconds, you want it to automatically move to the next slide. Okay? We'll go ahead and do this. First, we need a new slide for it to move to. So I'm going to make a new slide. Okay. So we've got our time sensor. Simply right click on it. We'll go to set duration. This is where you're setting how much time goes off before, how much time needs to elapse before the sensor goes off. Because we're going to take 10 seconds. Okay. I'm going to right click again, do on trigger. There's only one possible trigger for a time sensor. That's just on elapsed. I'm going to click that. Just like with proximity sensors, it goes green. This means you're in this mode where you're setting what will happen when the sensor goes off. In other words, what will happen after 10 seconds. Now, just as before, I want to trigger a slide or a scene transition. So I'm going to go up to the scene. I'm going to do set slide, and I'm going to change the integer, in this case, not to 1, but to 5. Okay, because we're just going to have it go automatically to the next slide. I'm going to make this actually a little bigger because I want people to have time to check out the video sphere on this presentation. Okay. Let me go ahead and see I can. Oh, right. To change the time, I'd want to adjust the duration here. It's my fault. 60 seconds. Okay, great. So now we've set this time sensor to move to slide 5. Just like with proximity sensors, time sensors can be used to set up any action, maybe a model appearing or scaling up or rotating, or a video playing, for example, or a sound playing. Now on the topic of sound, I see we have this big, beautiful fountain. And I believe in your asset pack, you actually have a fountain sound. Go ahead and drag that into your library. I'll show you how to set this up. I see the fountain sound is here. I'm going to drag it into the presentation. Okay. Now the sound, you'll see that when you have it selected in your asset library, you can choose between ambient or 3D. If a sound is ambient, it means it'll sort of play all over the place at equal volume for everyone. Now, if it's 3D, it'll have sort of directional audio. In other words, it'll sound as if it's coming from this area of the fountain. Okay, in this case, so I do want it to be 3D. I want the sound to sort of come from this area. And I'm going to position the sound sort of right on the fountain. Now, I want it to automatically start playing as soon as users hit this scene. So I'm going to select Start Playing. And I'd like it to loop. So it's kind of a brief clip. So I want it to actually loop in the background. I'm going to make its volume kind of low. Sort of a background noise so that people can still hear each other as they're talking inside your presentation. Okay, fantastic. So We have set up kind of a basic presentation here. And I know this was kind of a whirlwind tour through the different asset types and through the different things you can do with Presentation Designer. I hope I've shown you that you can not only bring in a wide variety of different assets, but also make those assets do interesting things based on your needs of the presentation. Different kinds of actions, setting up different proximity sensors so that users can trigger particular things, and all without coding. Okay. And now what I want to show you is how to actually meet inside of your presentation with other people in VR. And I'll show you the different kinds of things you can do once you're actually in Vizible inside of a session. Okay. Now I want to make sure that all of our stand-ins have reset viewpoint on them so that people are appearing at the right spot. Okay. So we've got reset viewpoint, looks good. On this slide, we've got them as well. That looks fine. And looks like on this slide, we still need the reset viewpoint because I forgot those. I'm gonna pull those in. All right, fantastic. And now I'll adjust this one too. Just realized there's no room, there's no environment on this slide. So I'll go ahead and drag in that conference room to bring us back to a home base here at the end. All right, so your presentation is all done, you're ready to go. What you want to do next is go to the Sessions tab down at the bottom left. Now, you'll always see what's called an editing session, and with an editing session ID. And if you ever want to see what your presentation looks like in VR, sort of while you're building it, you can actually use this editing session ID, just copy it, open up the attendee client, put in the ID, and you'll actually be good to go. This is a really handy way for you to kind of check in on your presentation in VR as you're building it. Because sometimes it's hard to really know what you're going to see from this perspective when you're in VR. So using the editing session really lets you get that look in VR. Okay, it's going to download the scene resources. And as soon as that's done, the scene will load up here. I have a lot running on my machine right now. So hopefully it all looks okay. But I think you'll all be able to see in a second here, it's actually loaded up my space. Right here I am, got my Lenovo headset, and I'm able to look around. And I'm able to see it's got my viewpoint positioned correctly, okay, based on where I put it. And everything looks good. Okay, so that's just a quick look at editing sessions. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that for now, right? Because what we want isn't just an editing session. We actually want a multi-user session where you can meet other people. So you want to click the plus button, okay? This will make a new session. And the session title, we're going to say webinar session number 1. Just like a GoToMeeting tool or other sort of meeting tool, you can schedule the session. Now, I want this session to be live sort of right now. It defaults to right now. You can actually pick the date, make it in advance or what have you, pick the particular time. And you can pick how long in advance you want people to be able to download the assets. So with Vizible, you have attendees actually download all the assets in your presentation in advance so that when you're actually inside the presentation with them, it's very low latency for sort of a seamless, smooth experience, right? We're not streaming the assets live. The download happens in advance. Okay? So once you're done here, I'll give it a description. You click Add Session. And this makes a new ID. And this is the ID that you'll want to share out to people who you want to invite to your session. So in this case, what you can do is actually right-click down here. You can click Copy Invitation Text. And what this does is it generates a nice, handy invitation for you that you can email people. Right? So I just pasted this into a notepad. And what you can see is it says, you're invited to a Vizible VR meeting. Here's the ID. Here's when it's scheduled. And to make things really easy, we give them a little link to the attendee client. So again, anyone, they don't need an account. They don't need to pay anything. They can just download the attendee client, open it up, put in your ID, download the assets, and then when it's go time, they'll be inside your presentation with you. Okay. So in this case, I'm actually going to go ahead and share this out to a colleague of mine who is sitting nearby so that you can see what it's like to meet other people here in VR. Share that ID. All right. Awesome. Now, attendees can't join until the presenter or host has joined. Okay. So just so you know, it's a quick little tip. But now, since I am the presenter, I'm going to go ahead and open up Vizible Presenter. Okay. I'm going to put in the session ID, and I'm going to log in with my credentials. Logging in, logging in. All right, looks good. And Steve, in case you'd actually like to join me as well, I'll go ahead and drop the session ID right here. Or anyone else that's watching. Feel free to open up the attendee and join me. Okay, here I am in my presentation. Now I'm going to show you around what things are like actually inside of Vizible. Right. See, I forgot to turn this animation on the blinds off, so the blinds are going a bit haywire, but don't mind that. Quick note, you can bring animations into Vizible. It's no problem. So to give you a quick run through of your menu of tools in here, if you look at your wrists as if you were checking the time, you will see that you've got a sort of menu. Oh, looks like someone's joining. There's Bettina. Hi, Bettina. Perfect. So it worked okay. If you look at your wrist as if you were checking the time, you'll see a menu button. You can tap that with the white ball at the end of your other controller that pulls up an array of tools. Okay? These tools range from laser pointers, also a measuring tool. You've also got a pencil to draw. You can do short range drawing or long range drawing. You can adjust the color. Okay. You can also, you have a slide clicker, which is the tool you use to actually navigate through the different slides you've set up in Presentation Designer. So when you pull it up, you'll see it, let me pull it up again. You've got forward and backwards. So you remember in slide 2, I set this up so that, oh, looks like we've got Steve with us. Hey there, Steve. Cool. That's awesome. You'll see those models floated up from below. I can go back and test it again. So here they come. And on slide 2, we've also got our PDF and also our image. Now, if you remember, I made these models grabbable. And one of the tools you can pull up is the grabber. Okay, and attendees can pull this up as well. Now, Steve, I know that using the desktop, looks like you're on desktop mode. The desktop UI takes a little bit of learning, takes some getting used to. I'm going to link you to a documentation article about how to use it after this. Once you get the hang of it, it's actually not so bad, but there's a little bit of a learning curve. So I've got the grabber on. You can see I can reach out and grab these models. I can pass one over to Bettina and then inspect it and grab it herself. I see she's looking at it. Get up close to these. I didn't make this grabbable, so that's why I can't reach out and grab that one. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide now. Okay. If you'll recall on this slide, right, I pulled up this video, and I didn't make it autoplay, so it's not going to be playing right now. To make it play, you can pull up the remote tool and point this at the video, and I can press play. Okay. There's our video. Nice. The playback is synchronized, so as I pause it, it'll pause for you, and as I play it, it'll pause for you. Same with video spheres. think we're ready to go to the next slide. I'm going to go to slide 4. All right, here we are in the piazza, right? And I've set up these proximity sensors. You know, I actually think that in my haste, I set these up wrong, which is why they're not working. I'm going to go back to PD and set them up the right way in a second. But normally, had I set these up the right way, reach out and click to cause particular actions to happen. Now you'll see our video sphere down there, and when you point your remote at that, that's when it expands out, and then you can play it to play your video. Okay. Now I'm going to expand that back down. Video looked a little blurry. I think I actually dragged the wrong version in. Test something really fast. Okay, then I navigated to the next slide, which took us back to this conference room. Now that we've seen this and the different tools that you and your attendees have in Vizible, I'm going to take us back to Presentation Designer to show you how you can actually configure what tools are automatically enabled for your presenters. I'm going to take the headset off. Okay, I'm back here in Presentation Designer. Now you saw in Vizible, you have an array of different tools. And let's say you're running a class or running a session with 5 or 6 people. It can get a little chaotic. Maybe you don't want people to be able to pull out the laser pointer, or even you might not even want them to access the menu, period. Or if you know they're on a slide, like slide 2 with grabbable objects, you might want to automatically enable the grabber for them so that they don't need to mess around with the menu. So the way to do this is with those presenter stand-ins. Okay? So if you right-click on a stand-in, you'll see an option is Default Tool. You can click on that, and then you can make their default tool the grabber. Okay? In this case, I'd like people to automatically have the grabber. So I'm going to go ahead and make it the grabber. I think I've got a question here. I'm going to zip to it. Oh, to come in on your Vive, Steve, I'll show you. You've got to have Steam VR running. It's got to detect your headset and your controllers, and then on the device drop-down, you can select Vive. The reason why you couldn't hear me in that session, I didn't have my microphone kind of picking up. I guess maybe at the range that I was standing up and walking away. So maybe, yeah, there might have been some mic issues as I was walking around. I apologize for that. Okay, but I'll shoot you an email, Steve, on the particulars of the Vive configuration. Good call that you were able to hop in though on the fly on desktop. Okay, so as I was saying, right-clicking on the presenter and attendee stand-ins lets you set the default tool if you know there's a certain tool that you want them to have on a particular slide. And you can adjust this on a slide-by-slide basis. So if you know on slide 3 you want to have the laser pointer already enabled, you can simply do that. Right-click, default tool, change the tool to the laser pointer. If you do not want attendees to be able to access the menu at all, which is understandable, particularly if you're working with, let's say, younger students, for example, where you have no reason for it, you can simply lock the menu. Okay? And that means on that slide, they will not be able to access the menu at all. Okay. All right, now I want to loop back because my proximity sensors, embarrassingly, didn't work during the demo. And I see they did not because the target of the sensors was set to the head. What I actually want the target to be was the hands. In other words, when you reach out and click with your hand, that should make the sensors go off. So I apologize for setting those up the wrong way, but I have fixed them now. Okay, perfect. With the target, you could also set it up so that the sensors go off when users drag a certain object into the proximity sensor area. Right, and you can actually set up some really interesting, say, training procedures using proximity sensors and targets set up in clever ways. Okay, and the video sphere looks like I actually dragged in the wrong asset. So I'm going to define a video sphere. I'm going to filter by video, and the subtype I'm going to set to be spherical. And I'm going to drag in a proper 360 video. In this case, this Hawaii video. Okay. See, it shows up here again as this sort of magical looking orb. We can preview it here in PD. I'm going to right click on it and click Start Playing. I'm going to sort of zoom into it. I'm going to move this other one out of the way first. Here we go. And now here we are. I'm sort of peeking inside of this magical bubble, and I can see my 360 video. And this is how it should have looked, but I dragged in the wrong asset. I apologize for that. So if we were to hop back into this session now, we'd be able to see this 360 video here with your attendees with playback synchronized and all the bells and whistles. Okay. Now that we have set these up the right way, I'd like to, well, if you'd like, go ahead and rejoin the session to check it out. But I think we are set. Now, I know we only really scratched the surface of what you can do here with Vizible. I'm going to set up some follow-up webinars to dive into some more advanced topics around 3D model workflow, bringing different kinds of models in here, and then also some of the more advanced things you can do with proximity sensors to build in interactivity and different triggers and button presses. And you really can do a lot even without writing any code. So you can set up some really exciting stuff. So there you have it. I hope you have the basics of how to use your Vizible web dashboard to invite users to your organization. Again, you can collaborate with people on these presentations. You can work on them just like a Google document. You see each other's changes in real time. As you're working alongside each other, you can see where they're working on the presentation. And then I hope I've given you basic familiarity with Presentation Designer itself, how to bring in different asset types, how to give them actions, how to set up basic proximity sensors. And then I also hope I've shown you that once you're in Vizible, the different tools that you can use, and then how you, as the designer, can configure those tools for your attendees. So I encourage you to have at it, build things, and invite me to your presentations. I'd love to check them out with you. Any follow-up questions you have, feel free to drop comments on this video. Shoot me an email for more kind of in-depth inquiries. I'm just baker@worldviz.com. And I will give you a recording of this webinar in your inbox. So thanks for taking the time.